Thank you so much. It's thrilling to be here from Chicago, and you guys are showing me some good weather, I must say. It is nice around here, so thank you so much. Well, I spend a lot of time on airplanes, a little bit more than I want to. People often ask, do you like traveling? And I say, well, no, I really don't like traveling, but I really like what I get to do once I get there. So it's been a little bit of a trek to get out here, but I'm loving what I'm doing while I'm here. And some people have commented that traveling has become increasingly more and more of a series of small humiliations. True, right? And so I remember the comedian Ken Davis saying that he got to a point where he decided that he was just going to go naked through security and get dressed on the other side. It would just be easier, because you would, have not bothered to put your hair up and to have a belt on and all that, because it's all gone by the time you're through. So I don't know if you've ever been on a flight where one of the attendants has tried to make a humorous monologue out of their announcements. Have you ever been on a flight like that? Southwest, the happy little airline, they like to do that, right? They're in their shorts and tennis shoes, and they love making humorous monologues. Well, I remember one time where it was a particularly bumping landing in Phoenix or someplace like that, and this particular airline had the custom of having the captain stand at the door and greet the passengers as they left. So he was a little embarrassed by the landing, but he decided to stand there anyway and take whatever abuse would come his way. And the last person off the aircraft was a little old lady, and she came doddering out with her cane, and she said, "Sonny, do you mind if I ask you a question?" And he said, "Well, no, ma'am, you go right ahead." And she said, "Did we land or were we shot down?" And another difficult landing, and the attendant came on with this announcement: "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats until Captain Crash and the crew have taxied what's left of the aircraft to the gate. And when the warning bells have silenced and the smoke has cleared, you can pick your way through the wreckage to the terminal." And one of the reasons I like that is that sometimes that's how it feels when we come to these moments when we have an opportunity to attend to our own souls, to be present to God in the depths of our being, to attend to our spiritual lives. Sometimes it feels like it is our lives, that we are the aircraft that has come crashing to a halt at this gateway of some time spent in God's presence attending to soul matters. And it feels like the warning bells are going off in our lives. It feels like the smoke is billowing, and we are picking our way through the wreckage of our own lives to this little tiny oasis in time where we have some time to be with God, which I'm hoping is what you were expecting today. That this is a time set apart for us to explore what it is to be with God. And so I used to feel really embarrassed and really uncomfortable about the fact that it was so hard for me to settle in, the fact that I was a little disheveled, coming into God's presence, that I wanted to have all my assignments completed, and I wanted to have the emails answered and cleared out, and I wanted to have the bathroom floor clean. I wanted my life to be together before I came to try to be with God. And I would wear myself out trying to get ready, for the encounter. And pretty soon I realized that I was missing the point entirely, that God is just so glad that I've come. That yes, he cares about my life, but it doesn't bother him that I'm disheveled. Doesn't bother him that I'm carrying a lot of baggage so that I can hardly get off the airplane. Doesn't bother him that my heart is still beating a little fast from all that I've been through in order to get there. He's just so glad I've come, because God is longing to be with me just like I'm longing to be with him. And so when I am able to tumble off the aircraft and walk into the gate, I find that it is God himself who's been waiting for me. And that God does indeed love to spend our ordinary days with us. He does. He loves to go with you to class. He loves to watch over you while you sleep. He loves to be with you as you study. He loves it when you send up the arrow prayers in the midst of walking across the campus. He loves being with you in your ordinary life. And at the same time, there are times when he also longs just to be with you, without so much distraction, without so much interruption, without so many other things competing for our attention. There's this longing that he has to be with us, and there's a longing that we have to be with him. And so I want to talk to you for a little bit about a man in the scriptures who found a way to be with Jesus, and he came in through the doorway that I think we all must come in through, and that is the doorway of our desire. How do we begin? Where do we begin in this topic of learning how to be with God and how to walk with God? And I'm going to suggest today that it begins in this most unlikely place. It begins with a willingness to get in touch with our spiritual desire. And I don't know about you, but I have been a Christian for a long time. I was raised in a pastor's home, and so I've been on this Christian journey for a really long time, and I used to think that God would take away all my longings. Have you ever heard a sermon like that? That if you believe in Christ, you will not have any longings anymore. God will fill all your longings. I used to think that was true. But I've been a Christian for a long time, and I am surprised at the fact that there is so much longing within me still. And I'm surprised at the power with which my own longing stirs. And in fact, these days I can hardly think of myself as anything else but a spiritual seeker, just someone who longs for God, someone who's seeking ways to be with God. And so I believe that it can become a wonderful place to begin this journey of being with God in some new ways, to pay attention to our desire. I remember one time when our youngest daughter was 15, she was a squirrely freshman in high school. It's kind of a scary season, you know, those freshmen in high school seasons. She was 15 and she wanted nothing more for her September birthday than to have 75 of her closest friends over for a barbecue. So we were a little daunted by that, but it was all she wanted. And so I did help her to whittle the list down to 50. We got the list down to 50. And then our whole family rallied to plan this party for her. So my husband was patrolling the property to make sure that no unwanted substances came and went. You know, you have to do that when people are newly in high school. I was busy with food preparation. Our older daughter, Charity, rallied all of her friends to come and do a karaoke competition. She was a senior in high school at the time. It ended up being a very cool evening. You know, the freshmen thought this was really cool to do a karaoke contest that was being facilitated by seniors in high school, you know, so it was very, very cool. And so it seemed like sort of an ordinary thing, even though we were a little bit daunted by this, you know, whole opportunity. But there was a moment in the evening when my own deeper longing and desire stirred. The kids were going through the hamburger line. We were doing hamburgers and hot dogs, and I was very busy replenishing plates and things like that. And there was one young man, everybody was really grateful, but one young man was so tender and so deeply appreciative in his expressions of thanks that I noted him. And he said, with sort of like wonder in his face and in his voice, he goes, "Thank you, Mrs. Barton, for having us. This is so much fun." And I was so caught by his expression of gratitude that I stopped what I was doing and I looked him in the eyes and I said, "Well, you're welcome. We're so glad to have you." And he said, "Really?" As though he was not at all accustomed to being enjoyed. And in that moment, my soul sort of stood up straight and I realized, wow, this is cool. This is my life. This is the life God has given me. Isn't this wonderful? So the moment passed. We had a great time. When the evening was over, we sat around in our living room and we reminisced about all that had happened through the evening, you know, the gifts that our daughter had gotten and the people who could dance and those who didn't have any beat at all, and just the fun moments of the evening. And it was in that moment that my longing stirred, and it sounded something like this. It was, "Oh God, you know, give me more moments like this. Give me more moments when I am fully present in the life that you've given me, in the very moment that you've given me. Moments when I'm able to be my very best and my most authentic self with the people that you have given me to love. Oh God, give me more moments like this. Moments when I'm with you and with the people I love and the best stuff is happening. Help me to learn how to do this even better." Because at the time, you know, I had lots of other things going on in my life too. I was writing and speaking and there were lots of other things to take my attention, and yet I realized this is my life. And my deeper desire underneath it all is to be fully present to God, to be with God in the life that God has given me. So that moment passed. There have been other moments of longing. I remember another time when I was hurt very badly in a ministry context, in a church context, and maybe some of you have gone through hurts in your lives with friends or with family, and you still carry those hurts and you grieve and you're sad and you realize that it's unresolved within you, but you don't know what to do about it. Well, I had a moment like that in my own life. I was surprised that Christians can be so mean to one another, but I was on the receiving end of some of that. And so I recognized at one point that even though the person who had wronged me needed to take responsibility for what he had done, that I had some responsibility that I needed to take. That as a result of what had happened to me, I'd become hardened and bitter and paranoid and suspicious. And whereas I used to have walked through life with sort of an open heart and ready to love people, now I had become closed and hard-edged, and I didn't want to share myself with anyone. And I realized, oh my goodness, there's a healing that has to take place in me, and I realize this is my job. Spiritual transformation, the ability to move through hurt and to be healed so that I'm not living in the world as the walking wounded. This is my job. And there was a cry that came out of my heart at that time, a cry of deep longing. And it sounded something like this: Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Yeah, that person had their stuff that they need to take responsibility for, but I need to take responsibility for crying out to you from this place, for living into my longing for spiritual transformation and to be with you in such a way that I am changed. And then I remember another time when I was in the middle of writing a book, and it was one of my earlier books, and I was struggling, and I had writer's block, and I just couldn't make the darn thing happen. And so I went into a meeting with a spiritual director, and I talked about all of my frustration and all of my longings relative to this book. And the spiritual director said to me, well, if you weren't writing this book, what would you be doing? So I started to talk about my family and how much I would be spending more time with my family and more time with my husband and that sort of thing. And then she said, well, what else? What else would you be doing if you weren't writing this book? And I said, well, I'd be taking better care of myself. I'd be exercising. I'd be getting out riding my bike. She said, what else would you be doing if you weren't writing this book? And you know what she was doing? She was getting me right down to the bottom of what I most wanted. I didn't realize what she was doing then. But she asked it the last time, and I started to fall apart, and I slipped out of my chair onto the floor, and I said with tears, I just want to be with God. I just want to be with God. And the truth was that the writing of this book, I was finding it to be so stressful and so full of pressure that I was not able to live into my longing to be with God. And so I began to recognize that the ability to get in touch with our desire, and particularly our desire for God, is the dynamic that helps us to change our lives. It's the dynamic that helps us to do things that are consistent with what we say we really want. And so for a while I was uncomfortable with this idea that desire can be so important in the spiritual life. And I began to realize, though, that God invites us to be in touch with our desires. In fact, Jesus, when he was walking the earth, when he wanted to have a deeper level of conversation with people who were seeking spiritually, he loved to ask them questions that helped them to get in touch with their desire. He would often ask some version of the question, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want? What do you seek? He asked that of the disciples in John 1. What do you seek? What are you wanting? And there was some way in which a person's willingness to engage Jesus on that question of desire, that it had the potential to draw them deeper and deeper into the life that they really wanted, and deeper into intimacy with God. And so at first, when I began to realize this, I was a little uncomfortable with getting in touch with desire, because I thought, well, isn't there something else that I should be doing with my time as a Christian person? You know, something more altruistic, something more selfless, you know, something less volatile, something less dangerous. And I was encouraged by these scriptures, and particularly I was drawn into the story of the person of Bartimaeus in Mark 10. If you remember, Bartimaeus was a blind person, and he spent his time begging by the side of the road because that was all he could do to make a living. And it's a very interesting story because there are some very interesting human dynamics in there. First of all, he had some sense that Jesus was going to be passing by on this particular day. And he realized that Jesus could perhaps do something for him that no one else had been able to do. No doctors, no gurus, no nothing. Nobody could do for him what most needed to be done. And so he realized that Jesus was going to pass by, and so he decided, you know what, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to reach out to Jesus. I'm going to cry out to Jesus. I'm going to see if he'll look to me and answer me and maybe do something about this blindness. So when Jesus was passing by with his disciples, he had a little bit of a dilemma. And the dilemma was this: how do I get Jesus' attention on this day? You know, it's a busy corner where I'm here begging. There are those pesky disciples who I think of themselves as bouncers. You know how bouncers have that feeling of self-importance around them. They like being the gatekeepers. They like being the ones who can give you permission or not to approach that important person. So all 12 of the disciples, I'm sure, were there, you know, being the bouncers that they knew how to be. And so Bartimaeus had this dilemma: how in the world am I going to get close enough to Jesus to talk to him about this desire that I have? And so what he did was he reached way down deep inside of himself, and he cried out from that place, and he said, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of David, have mercy on me. And interestingly enough, the people around him didn't like this. They didn't like this crying out that he was doing, and so they tried to silence him. And maybe you've had that happen before as well, where you have deep desires of your own heart and you try to talk about it with people who just don't get it. And they try to silence you. They try to tell you you shouldn't want that, or you can't have that, or that's too much, or we can't afford it, or you shouldn't be thinking that highly of yourself. You know, very subtly, people try to silence the desires of the heart, and so it's uncomfortable. But you know what? Bartimaeus was so deeply in touch with what he really wanted, spiritually speaking, that he just went deeper inside of himself, and he cried out even louder, and he said, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Jesus was completely arrested by his cry. And he stopped right there in the middle of the road, and he said to his disciples, "Tell that man to come here." And so this was a very exciting moment in Bartimaeus' life. And the disciples came running over and they said, "Take heart, it is he. He's calling you." And Bartimaeus sprang up. The scriptures say that he sprang up and he threw off his cloak and he came running to Jesus. I love this part of the story because I'm not always sure that I'm as willing as Bartimaeus was, to spring up and to throw off anything that would keep me from running to Jesus and to run, literally run to him. I mean, I have my dignity after all, don't you? We have our dignity to preserve. Some commentators believe that his outer cloak was the only thing of value that he owned, that he had the money from his begging stuffed in the pockets and in the seams. Some commentators feel that outer garment was that, and that what he had on underneath was either his undergarments or nothing at all. And so coming to Jesus without his cloak really represented coming to Jesus without his dignity, coming to Jesus raw and vulnerable and human and open, willing to receive whatever it is that Jesus had to give. So whatever it means, he threw off his cloak, whatever it was that was going to slow him down in coming to Jesus. He was ready, he knew what he wanted, and he came running to Jesus, and there was this moment where the two of them are face to face, and Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" The pivotal moment in the story. What do you want me to do for you? Can you imagine yourself in that place with Jesus where Jesus is reaching out to you and willing to be face to face and eye to eye with you, and he says to you, "What do you want me to do for you?" Would you be ready with an answer? Are you in touch with the depths of your own being? Would it be something superficial, perhaps, like a good grade on a test that's coming up, or the ability to finish a paper, or something relationally that you got going on? Are you aware of anything deeper, any kind of deeper desire of your heart? Would you know what to say to Jesus if he were to ask? And would you be able to be honest? Would you be willing to be raw and tell him the thing that was most true for you? Well, Bartimaeus was ready, and he said, "My teacher, I want to see." And I don't know about you, but I would have perhaps found this moment to be a little bit uncomfortable, because I would have thought, "Now, wait a second, Jesus, don't you know what I need? I am sitting here by the side of the road begging. Isn't it obvious what I need?" I might have been a little irritated. I also might have felt like the question was a little bit personal, and I might not have felt like answering it in the middle of this busy street, so I might have wanted to say to Jesus, "Excuse me, but that is kind of a personal question. Could we just go over there and talk about this in private? I just don't want to do this right here." I might have said that too. And that would have been somewhat true, because it is a very personal question. What it is that you are deeply longing for right now, what it is that you want, what it is that you need Jesus to do for you is a very personal thing. But Bartimaeus was ready, and he was undeterred, and so he spoke clearly about what he wanted. And of course, that particular story ends in a way that we're all very familiar with. Jesus actually heals him right then and there. But then there's also this little tiny phrase at the very end of the story, and it says that the blind man got up and followed Jesus on the way. In other words, he decided to go with Jesus. And I think that's so very interesting, because Jesus had said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." And the man said, "No, you've got what I need. I can't any longer live my life as a blind person. I don't even know how to put my life together now. I'm going to walk with you, and I'm going to trust that you know how to lead me into a fruitful way of living." And so that witness, it was coming in through the doorway of desire. Bartimaeus' willingness to be in touch with his deepest desire, his willingness to be honest with Jesus about his desire when Jesus asked him what he wanted, and then his awareness that Jesus was the one who had the life that he was looking for. And so I want to ask you today, when was the last time you felt it? When was the last time you were brave enough to feel your own longing for more? Your longing for love, perhaps. You're longing to belong. You're longing for more of God than you have right now. You're longing to be with God and to walk through your days with God. You're longing for deeper levels of healing and transformation in areas of your life that you know are not healed, that need a touch from God. When was the last time you allowed yourself to touch your own desire When was the last time that you were confident that you could be with God with that, and God could be with you with your desire, and that maybe the ability to be together about that could open up some new path, that maybe you too could follow Jesus in some new way if you were willing to get in touch with what you most deeply want? I remember another time in my own life, and I was in my early 30s, and it was after I had been in ministry for quite a while, and I had, an active family life. I was in graduate school and all of that. And like I mentioned, I had been raised in a pastor's home, and I've been in the church all of my life, but I came to a place in my own life where I realized that even though I had been walking a faithful Christian path, the intimacy that I was seeking with God just wasn't there. I also recognized sinful patterns in my life. I recognized in the crucible of family and parenting that I was really still basically selfish, that I had been walking with Jesus this long, but it hadn't transformed me in the ways that I wanted to be transformed. I also noticed a kind of drivenness, an achievement-oriented drivenness, a performance-oriented drivenness that kept me all riled up. And I wasn't living well in my body. I wasn't living well with the people that I loved. I wasn't living in a pace of life that was realistic and sustainable for me. I was pushing myself beyond human limits. And because I was willing to get in touch with sort of the broken place of my life, it opened up desire for a way of life that works. And I realized that none of what I knew of yet in my own Christian life was bringing about that particular way of life. And so I sought out a spiritual guide at that point and just kind of unloaded everything in my life that just didn't feel like it was working. And she let me talk for a while, and then finally she said, "Ruth, you are like a jar of river water all shaken up. And what you need is to sit still long enough so that the sediment can settle and the water can become clear." And that was one of the most powerful moments in my spiritual life for two reasons. First of all, it was powerful because it named me. And I had to say, you know what? I'd like to be able to argue with her. I would like to be able to say, now, wait a second. I'm a person in Christian ministry. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a whole lot more than a jar of river water all shaken up. But the truth is that in the very core, essential place of my being, that is what I was. A jar of river water all shaken up. And the image, the vision of a jar of river water that had been sitting still long enough so that the sediment could settle and the water could become clear. That vision, that metaphor called to me, and I wanted it really bad. And I was willing to change my life to get it. And I imagined a life in which it was so calm on the inside that I could actually experience the presence of God with me. And I could distinguish it from all the other things that were so riled up within me. I imagined being like that jar of river water and having a calm and a peace inside my heart and my life that I was not familiar with yet. I didn't have it. There was so much drivenness. I imagined it being clear enough on the inside that I could actually hear the guidance of God, and I could hear God's voice as being distinct from all the rest. And the image called to me, and I thought, I'm willing to change my life. I'm willing to do something really, really different. And so the question again is, when was the last time you felt it? When was the last time you were brave enough to be with your desire in God's presence and allow God to be with you with your desire, so that it could perhaps open up something brand new, some brand new way of walking with God? I believe that any new leg of the spiritual journey starts here. It starts with our ability to be honest with God, to say something true to God, and to allow God to be with us in that place. It's very tender. Being with our desire is very tender, isn't it? Because it speaks to our humanity, it speaks to the parts of us that still have a need, it speaks to the things and the aspects of our lives that we haven't been able to accomplish for ourselves, it speaks to the broken places, it speaks to the places of longing. And I think the other thing is that we're afraid. We think, aren't our desires shot through with human deception? Isn't it dangerous and volatile? If I pay attention to my desires, won't I just go down a path I ought not go? Isn't it kind of scary to pay attention to desire? Shouldn't I pay more attention to my oughts and my shoulds and do what everybody else tells me to do? Well, I think the scriptures teach us that there are authentic desires within us, and if we can get in touch with them, it's not dangerous. If we can be with them with God, not acting out on them all the time, but be with them with God, then God can open up a whole new path, a whole new way of being with Him intimately and following Him on this path of desire. And so in my own journey, I had to be in touch with the fact that I wanted God and that I wanted intimacy with God, life-changing encounter with God more than I wanted anything else. I wanted it more than success. I wanted it more than I wanted certain relationships. I wanted it more than I wanted some of the other things that I thought I wanted in life, like shopping or whatever. And I actually remember times when I would choose between shopping and being quiet in God's presence, or what I would do with my time when some time freed up. I had to be in touch with my desire to know this is what I'm going to do today. Because desire opens up a world of choice. When you are in touch with what you really want, there's a whole world of choice that opens up. And the choice is to live your life according to what you say you really want. To establish rhythms in your life for walking with God. And so as I got in touch with my own desire at that particular point in my life, the little trajectory of my life was up and to the right externally, but inside there was this emptiness. Inside there was this longing for more, if you will, this desire to be with God in some different and some new ways. But because I could distinguish my deepest desires, I actually let go for a while. I actually let go of my roles and my responsibilities, not in my family, but in the church that I was serving. I actually let go of the church for a while, because I had all my performance stuff all mixed up in what was going on in the church. That was the place I did my performing. So I had to drop out for a while, and I had to seek God on God's own terms for a while. And what I realized is that I could now choose to live my life according to what I said I really wanted. So my spiritual guide, she invited me into the practices of solitude and silence. She invited me into the practice of just sitting with God openly and receptively for about 10 minutes a day. Interesting, because I had a hard time with it. I had been living in such an activistic, type A driven way for so long that even sitting quietly in God's presence for 10 minutes, not a typical quiet time where I'm doing a lot of Bible study and reading around the world in 30 days or less, or listening to worship tapes and CDs, or teaching tapes and CDs, or reading Christian self-help books. Not that kind of quiet time. The kind of quiet time where you sit openly and receptively without an agenda, even a spiritual one, just being willing to be with God and to allow God to be the one who takes the initiative with me. Rather than me coming in with my own agenda, allowing God to take the initiative with me. And my spiritual director encouraged me to discover a breath prayer. Just a simple little prayer that expressed my desire for God. And the simplest prayer that I could come up with at that time, the truest prayer, the truest thing I could say to God at that time was, "Here I am, Lord." And it was a wonderful little prayer because I could pray it with my breathing. I could breathe and just say, "Here I am, Lord. Here I am, Lord." I didn't know much about what was going on, but I just knew I wanted to be with God. And so I just said to him over and over again, "Here I am. I just want to be with you." And for the first year or so, it was really, really hard, because it seemed like as I would be sitting there in silence that the laundry needed to be moved from the washer to the dryer, otherwise it would be wrinkled forever, Or the car was so dirty out in the driveway and I needed to wash it, Or tasks would just, bring themselves to me, and lists would form in my mind of things I ought to be doing rather than spending this time with God. And then the worst thing that Satan did with me during that time, the biggest temptation, was that I would get my best new article and book ideas during that 10 minutes in solitude and silence. And I began to discover that Satan will use anything, even good stuff, to distract us from being with God in this way. But you know what? Over time, I was able to settle in, and I began to look forward to those times as times of rest in God. I discovered solitude and silence as a place, first of all, of rest. That when I came into God's presence, it was like the game of musical chairs. You know how that game goes. You go round and round and round while the music plays, and when the music stops, you sit down right where you are, and you're with God, right where you are. Whatever it is that's going on that day, you're just with God with it. And so I experienced solitude to be a place, number one, of just being with God with what is. I love that phrase. I love that description of what the practices of solitude and silence are. Just being with God with what is. So I would sit down right where I was on any given day, and I would be with God with what is. It's a very restful thing, because I didn't have to fight with anything. I didn't try to fix anything. I knew that's not what I was there for. I just could be comfortable being myself in God's presence and be with what is. And then I began to discover solitude as a place of rest in God, where I could say to my mind, "Thank you so very much. You have served me really, really well, but right now I'm going to let you rest. I'm going to let my heart rest into my soul and into my heart. I'm not going to think so hard and work so hard and try to figure everything out. I'm just going to rest my mind for a little bit." Psalm 139 says, "Oh Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I've calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. You know, a weaned child is a child who has been with its mother long enough to know that its needs will be met. And a weaned child can be with its mother and just know peace just because his or her mother is around. And the psalmist is saying right there that that's how our souls can be with God, that we can actually learn how to rest like very young children who are safe with their parents. We can learn how to rest that way. And so solitude became a place of rest in God for me, a place where I could just rest my soul in God's presence. It also became a place where God and I would have some pretty energized conversations, you know, where God could ask me a really true question or where I would hear my own truest questions. One of the questions that came was, had to do with my own identity. It's like the question was, you know, what am I so afraid of? Why am I always pushing so hard? What am I afraid of when I think about being in silence and being quiet? Am I afraid that I'm not going to know who I am? Am I afraid that the world is not going to know who I am? What am I afraid of? Why do I avoid being with God this way? The scriptures say, be still and know that I am God. The scriptures say, in silence my soul waits for you and you alone, O God. From you alone comes my salvation. Why am I so resistant to waiting on God and letting God be the one who takes initiative in my life? And so part of what God had to unfold for me in solitude and silence was that I had been proving myself in the world. I had been shoring up my sense of identity by all the things I could do in the world. And that's why solitude and silence were so frightening, was because I had to let go of all the ways I usually try to prove myself and just be in God's presence and believe that God valued me even when I wasn't doing much for him. It was hard. It was difficult. But then I also began to encounter God. I began to experience the peace, and I began to live into a real experience of God's unconditional love for me. And that God loved me just as much when I was sitting quietly with my hands open, not doing anything for him overtly, as he loved me when I was out there doing stuff for him. And I began to touch that calm center that's possible for all of us in God's presence. And I began to be more and more aware of how unconditionally loved I was all the time. And then I began to take that quality of presence back out into my relationships with others. And I would recognize that there was a peace that I had, even in the midst of difficulty. And it had to do with what I'd been cultivating with God. I would also begin to receive guidance because there was a quiet space on the inside where I could hear God's voice and I could follow God's direction for me rather than being pushed and pulled by everybody else's ideas or pushed and pulled by my own desire and need to prove myself and to perform. And so just like Elijah, who stood on the mountain and experienced the presence of God and stood there in the sheer silence, knowing that he was in God's presence, I began to experience God's presence as the unconditional, unchanging, loving reality of my life. Not only in moments when I was silent, but in every moment of my life, there was a witness that I began to experience. And it came as I said no to some of the outer distractions and gave some time to God every day when I was willing to just be with him beyond all of my performance, beyond all of my achievement-oriented drivenness, beyond all the ways that I normally shore up my sense of self, that there is a witness that I can experience with God in solitude and silence when we're just together for my own soul's sake, because God wants to be with me and I want to be with God. And that bedrock of identity is then carried into the world, and I'm able to be fruitful in the world, not because I need people to affirm me or because I'm looking for achievement or approval to define myself. I already know that. I know that in my relationship with God, but I can come into relationship with other people with a sense of fullness. And so I have experienced the fact that even though it is frightening to pay attention to our deepest desires, that attention right there where I paid attention to how much I wanted God more than I wanted anything else around, it took me on a whole new path. It took me on a path that's landed me right here in front of you here today. Because our desire is a powerful dynamic in the spiritual life. And in fact, our desire is the fuel that will motivate and drive the spiritual journey. For a little while, we can function on the basis of oughts and shoulds. This is what you ought to do. This is what you should do. This is what it means to be a good Christian. But eventually, you're going to need to move beyond that. And you're going to need to be in touch with your deepest spiritual desires and to trust that God can be with you there. and that God can meet you in that place, and that God can open up the way in which he meets those deep desires. And so we discovered that solitude, a journey into solitude, is really a journey of faith. It's really a journey of believing that God will be with me there, and that God will meet me there, and that God will lead me from that place in the way that's everlasting. So I want to encourage you today to know for sure that your desire for more of God than you have right now, your desire for deeper levels of spiritual transformation, your desire to be with God, your desire to know God's love for you, your desire to belong and to have a deep sense of belonging, that those desires are the truest thing about you today. They are more true than your successes and failures. They are more true than your personality type. They are more true than your grade point average. They are more true than what you think you're called to vocationally and what you're working for in this external world. The desires that you have for God today are the truest thing about you. It is where your soul is speaking to you. It's your soul that knows your deepest spiritual desires. It's the truest thing about you. It is the part of you that will exist after your body goes into the ground. It's the part of you that God knew in its unformed substance before he brought you forth in physical form. So I ask you again today, are you brave enough? Are you willing to sit with your desire and to let God be with you with your desire, and to trust that if you do that it can open up a whole new leg of your spiritual journey, a whole new way of being intimate with God. You know, I've spent a lot of time on the sidelines of youth soccer games. I don't know if any of you are athletes and spend time playing sports, but I remember when one of our daughters was playing pretty good soccer when she was young. And I remember one time there was a man on the sidelines, a dad, who was behaving very badly. Have you ever seen parents behaving badly on the sidelines, of a soccer game? So he was kind of pudgy and overweight, and he was standing there on the sidelines yelling at these two fourth grade girls or something like that who had converged on the ball. They were trying to win the ball for their team, and he's on the sidelines just yelling, "You gotta want it, you gotta really want it, how bad do you want it?" Have you ever heard anything like that on the sidelines of a soccer game? It's not very pretty. I was kind of irritated. I thought, oh, come on, stop it. You couldn't even run up and down that field once, And these girls have been running up and down the field. Just stop it, But I also realized that there was something really, really true in what he was saying. And it is this: that there is something about human desire, there is something about human want to that has an impact on the outcome of the human situation. That sometimes it's not the people who have the most giftedness, it's not the people who have had the best opportunities that achieve what they want in this world. It's the people that want it and want it really badly, and they want it badly enough to overcome any obstacle in order to achieve it. I think that's what Jesus knew. I think that's why Jesus kept encouraging people to get in touch with their desire. And I don't even pretend to know everything about why desire is so significant in the spiritual life. I just know that it is. I know that over and over again, Jesus opened up these conversations around what people really, really wanted. And I know that there's something about the dynamic of desire when it comes together with Jesus' ability to meet our desire that's very catalytic for the spiritual life. The willingness to name it in God's presence is catalytic in the spiritual life. I know that human desire is one of the most powerful motivators for a life lived consistently with intentionality and purpose. That it is our being in touch with desire that gives us the opportunity to establish what I like to call sacred rhythms, practices like solitude and silence and interaction with Scripture and self-examination and Sabbath keeping, that our desire for a way of life that works, our desire to be with God, opens up the possibility of establishing rhythms in our lives that keep us connected with what we say we really want. The great German theologian Meister Eckhart says that the reason we do not see God is the faintness of our desire. What do you think about that? The reason we do not see God is the faintness of our desire. And so my guess is that because of the speakers that you've had and the focus of this conference on what it means to be with God, that some of us are really in touch with that desire right now. We are in touch with our desire to walk with God in the ordinary moments of our lives. We are in touch with the desire to experience intimacy with God through the spiritual practices that open us up to that possibility. We are in touch with our desires to be with God in such a way that we actually change, that we actually become less selfish, that we actually become more discerning, and we're in touch with that desire for withness more than usual. And Meister Eckhart is saying, allow it to be big in you. Allow it to burn white hot. Let it grow. Let your desire grow, because it will lead you in the ability to order your life around the things that you say you really want. You know, a few years ago, I was on the beaches in Florida, and I was there quietly just for some R&R for myself. And one of the things that I noticed was that the sun lovers, some sun lovers came out while the sun was shining, and they played volleyball, and they laid out in the sun and all that sort of thing. But that in the evenings, the real sun lovers came out. And these were the people that like to watch sunsets. And so they would bring out their chairs, you know, those low chairs to the ground, and they would sit with their feet dabbling in the surf. And maybe they'd have their glass of wine or something like that. I hope I'm allowed to say that here at Biola. Am I? Okay, good. Because there's nothing like wine and a sunset, you know, it just goes together really well. And so if there were children, the children were playing quietly in the water. And if they were lovers, you could hear them talking quietly, and they would lean into each other. And it was like they were waiting for the start of a great symphony or the start of a good movie. And there was a sense of anticipation. And I thought, what in the world are they doing out there? You know? And then I realized, what they're doing is waiting for the sunset. So this thing that happened every single day, the sun setting on the ocean, people came out and ordered their days around watching sunsets. No one had to tell them they ought to. No one had to tell them they should. They just knew that they wanted to, that there was something so beautiful and so compelling about sunsets that they wanted to order their lives around watching sunsets. So there was a moment once when I started to do it with them. You know, I thought, well, this is really cool. I'm going to order my life around watching sunsets. And so one night I was at a grocery store, heaven forbid, instead of being on the beach watching the sunset. And when I saw that I was missing the sunset, I just dropped my groceries and ran to the beach because I didn't want to miss even one of these beautiful rhythms that happens every single day. And I realized in that moment, that's what my life can be in God. That I can have identified sacred rhythms in my life, ways of being with God that open me up to God's transforming presence that are so rich and so compelling and so beautiful that nobody has to tell me that I should do it. I just want to. And that is my prayer for you, that as you get in touch with your desire and you realize how much you want God and how much you want to walk with God, that you will explore the practices that you know will help you to open to the presence of God. And I would suggest that you begin with solitude and silence, that you begin with a little bit of 10 minutes a day where you just start out by letting the music of your life stop. You sit down right where you are, and for 10 minutes, you decide which 10 minutes it's going to be somewhere in your life, and you sit down and you stop, and you are just with God with what is. And maybe you sit with your hands open on your lap as a way of saying to God, I'm letting go of my own agenda. I want to receive whatever you have for me to give, or whatever you have to give to me, and I'm going to sit here and just be open and available, and I'm going to wait for your presence. I'm going to wait for your salvation in my life. And I think the best way to begin any period of time in solitude or silence in God's presence is to start by just being able to say something true to God. Can you do that? Can you sit down in God's presence? The music of your life stops. Can you sit openly in His presence and just say something true to Him? And so I want to give us the chance to close with that kind of an exercise today. I don't ever like to talk about spiritual things without letting us experience something. So I'm going to invite you into a prayer that I just love. I'm going to invite you to put your things away if you want to get comfortable in your seat. You might want to sit with your feet flat on the floor, back straight, as a way of telling God that you are open, that you're available, and that you're alert for His presence. If it feels authentic to you to open your hands, Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. The Hebrew word rapha there means literally to let go of your grip. So if you want to open your hands as a way of praying in your body and saying, I'm letting go of my grip. I usually cling so hard to things, but right now, God, I'm going to let go of my grip, and I'm going to just be with you in this true way. So I'm going to read a bit of this prayer, and then we'll stop for a moment, and it'll be your chance to say something true to God, whatever it is that you need to say to Him. And then I will finish it up. The band will come back, and we'll be finished. All right? So open hands if you wish. You don't have to, but if you'd like, you can open your hands, close your eyes if you'd like, and allow this prayer to speak maybe for you today. Holy One, there is something I wanted to tell you, but there have been errands to run, bills to pay, arrangements to make, meetings to attend, friends to entertain, washing to do. and I forget what it is I wanted to say to you, and mostly I forget what I'm about or why. Oh God, don't forget me, please, for the sake of Jesus Christ. Eternal One, there is something I wanted to tell you, but my mind races with worrying and watching, with weighing and planning, with rutted slights and pothole grievances, with leaky dreams and leaky plumbing and leaky relationships I keep trying to plug up. And my attention is preoccupied with loneliness, with doubt, and with things I covet. Oh God, don't forget me, please, for the sake of Jesus Christ. Almighty One, there's something I wanted to ask you, but I stumble along the edge of a nameless rage, haunted by 100 floating fears. And I forget what it is I wanted to say to you, and how to say it honestly, or how to do much of anything. Oh God, don't forget me, please, for the sake of Jesus Christ. Oh, Father in heaven, what I wanted to ask in my blundering way is, don't give up on me. Don't become too sad about me, but laugh with me and try again with me. And I will with you too. Holy One, there is something I wanted to tell you. Oh, Father in heaven, perhaps you've already heard what I wanted to tell you. What I wanted to ask is, forgive me, heal me, increase my courage, please. Renew in me a little of love and faith, and a sense of confidence and a vision of what it might mean to live as though you were real and I mattered and everyone was brother and sister. What I wanted to ask in my blundering way is, don't give up on me. Don't become too sad about me. But laugh with me and try again with me. And I will with you too. What I wanted to ask is for peace enough to want and work for more, for joy enough to share, for awareness that is keen enough to sense your presence here, now, there, then, always. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.